Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of The Process where we take a journey through how I got from this sketch to this final image. Let's check it out. As we start off, we have a generalized sketch. And the sketch is super important. You know, it's the first initial thoughts that I kind of like to put down, and it kind of gives me a little bit of clarity about what kind of stuff I want to keep, what kind of stuff I don't want to add, you know. And as you can see in the image, it's a really simple sketch. So my goal here is to use this sketch, use some basic tools for how we lay out photo according to the basic, foreground, middle ground, background of the image, and we start building it from there. So you can see my asset library. Right now, I've chosen a lot of photos to be able to use for this composition. Well, first off, I'm working on the sky, getting some cloud shapes situated so that the silhouettes feel like, pretty interesting shapes. The shapes in the sky can often activate a sense of being at calm or a little bit more busy. So I want to at least keep that in mind. There's a lot of information that's on the ground plane. In fact, most of the story and the real elements are on the ground. So I don't want to make the sky too busy. I want to make the sky something that can help activate and bring the eye closer to that focal area. In fact, one of the things that I want to show right now is the shadow coming down from the building. The shadow, in pretty simple lighting, we're just thinking that it's coming from the top left. The shadow actually points a line into the composition. And a little bit of the building on the left and the right, they both help kind of stage that center part. Now I'm going to put a little bit of activity, the sense of movement and the sense of action. So I want things that feel like they can move within the wind. These elemental elements such as explosions, debris, smoke, dirt elements, dust elements. In video games and film, we're not just looking at still images. Oftentimes we're looking at things in motion, and it's the things that have subtle movement that bring so much life and believability to the overall image itself, So those are some of the things that I like to pay attention to while I'm developing a concept, because we have many senses, sight, sound, touch, taste, and we want to be able to utilize a lot of those while we're doing our concept designing. Because we want to do just more than fool the eye. We want to bring all the sensibilities into play. All right. Now, I have the smoke back there. The background is getting very situated. I feel like the background, or at least the sky, is starting to get the tank, the armored vehicle, to be really showcased. So now I'm going to move forward onto the ground plane. Let's start with activating the shadows, the cast shadows. And, when it comes to lighting, we either have light or shadow most of the time to really utilize as tools to help show the lighting direction. Sometimes we could show patches of light or God rays going through the air. Yeah, that helps shows the direction of the light side. But shadows are also equally powerful because without light, there's no shadows, right? So shadows become actually, in my opinion, one of the stronger tools to show where light is coming from, because we see light hitting the ground all the time in the daytime. We kind of see and observe that type of information. We know what it looks like. But oftentimes we really know the time of day from shadows, right? Like on a sundial and things like that. We know sunset by the long streaky shadows and that sort of thing. So I'm trying to play with that sensibility. Hopefully, we can make this image read by utilizing really strong value structure. And that's what we're trying to use first. The sky tones, the background, all the vehicles, we're trying to put them in a value structure that makes sense. And for this one, it's a pretty go-to, standard method of dark foreground, and as things go back in space, they get lighter. But in this particular area, the midground, where this all-terrain armored vehicle is, that's the midground, and there's a bit of a spotlight that you could see that hits the ground right in front of it. That's the type of lighting scenario that I'd like. A little bit of this staged kind of theatrical lighting, right? All right, so here we go into some details. Now that we've got the background a bit situated. We have the sky tones, the buildings toned down. We have some of the riot police in the back getting situated with good values. Now I'm working on this main focal point, this vehicle. I don't work on the vehicle first because I like to set up all the basic information around it before I jump in and do the actual focal point. It gives me a little bit of time to understand what to do, how to do it. And to be honest, it's about building confidence through the process. And that's one thing that I think is important is, every piece that you do is kind of for the first time. And it's important that we build the techniques to understand how to do that particular piece. Every piece is a little bit different. And for you artists that know what I mean, let me know what you think in the comments. Let me know if that's making sense, and would love your thoughts. But anyhow, going back to this, let's start detailing out this initial design. Now it's an all-terrain vehicle, armored, very heavy plated. It's probably been used in many different campaigns, traveled around from country to country, so there is going to be weathering, damage, dirt, grime. It's definitely not off of the showroom floor, so it shouldn't look new. So my whole goal here, while I'm painting in more details, I'm also trying to get the sense of the grit, like making it feel used and kind of used and abused, right? Like it shouldn't be something that these soldiers should be like, oh, I want to wash this tank when I get back to the base, right? It's like such a piece of equipment used for rugged type of stuff. So that's what I want to try to do. And particularly for me, when I look at a vehicle, I tend to look at certain elements, maybe these are things that you can also pay attention yourself when you're just observing elements, which is I tend to look at tires, the details on the tires. I tend to look at the wheels. I tend to look at certain details along the body lines, accents that are familiar, such as handlebars, lights, shovels, and equipment. So those are the things that I tend to look at when I'm actually in front of a vehicle like this. So guess what? Those are the things that I want to pay attention to when I'm putting in details. I don't want to put them everywhere, but I want to put them particularly in an area that I tend to focus on. So hopefully you as the viewer will also look at the things that I like, right? As the designer, that's a very intentional type of thing. All right, so for some grit, we have a really clean floor, so that doesn't really make sense in this type of scenario. So let's get it dirtified. Let's get it dirty. Let's get it grimy. Have a sense of storytelling and narrative, even on the ground design. And that's the thing about environments, is that it's not just a stage and a location and an environment, but it actually is an area that has story. An environment has narrative elements as well. And we can design it by, just with the narrative of the elements on the ground, the smoke in the background, we already start to fill in what's the root cause and what is happening here. So, in my opinion, excuse me, that's a really good part of telling a narrative is, can we still do it even without a major character or a major, like the main character in the scene. So as much as possible, that's my overall goal, is to try to get it going in that direction. All right, just some paint down. We got a lot of wheels, so I'm trying to make it as I guess, streamlined as possible, sort of making it very modular. Want lighting to show in and out, kind of dappled. Maybe there's more smoke plumes outside of the picture canvas that we don't see. And that comes to a good point, which is a lot of time I get feedback from art directors in which sometimes they'll let me know, like, James, I can really get a good sense of what's happening outside of the picture plane. I can feel what's happening to the left and imagine what's happening behind the camera. And I think that becomes such an immersive way to develop world building, the viewer gets a sense of the full world, not just this little glimpse of what you're looking at, in the scene, but you can get a sense of the activity around, the sounds, the noises, the smells, and everything that has to do with selling this concept, which I've talked about this before, which is, concept artists, we're pretty much like these professional liars that do awesome lies to make very, very believable scenes, right? So we're using all these artistic abilities to try to do so. As much as possible, I'd like to say that there's a 1, 2, 3, 4 method with all of this, and we don't have to go back a step to fix or adjust, but that's just not the case. Even the most master chef has to taste their food and maybe sprinkle a little bit more salt, add a little bit more flavor, a little bit more pepper, right? They adjust, and that's what these are. As an artist, we utilize and develop all of these skill sets, but we still have to use our eye to judge all of the decisions, right? So there's a time to build, and then there's a time to edit. And so oftentimes when we're zooming out, we want to see the information overall, right? So we can tell, okay, this area is a little bit too dark. We need to lighten it up. I would optically like to see more information over here and over there. And I was recently watching this podcast about photographers and like professional photographers, and they talk about how they like to see information in shadows and make sure that there's a good field of depth with shadow information and shadow read. I thought that was really cool because, we're trying to utilize a lot of the same information when it comes to creating illustrations and concept art. Anyhow, back to this vehicle. So just with a little bit more details and paying attention to some of the lighting, putting in some accents, right? The little rim lighting and some of the light accents that are on the front and the turret of the vehicle. Those are accents that, again, like I was saying, it's things that I like to look at, right? So I'm going to put that attention in there to give it the specific areas that I feel like are interesting or are important. All right. So the overall direction of this is getting solidified. At this point, I'm just trying to get the rest of the environment to follow the basic lighting rules of this piece, right? We have a lot of top-down ambient lighting. Okay, so I want to make sure that any angles that are perpendicular to the sky plane get a little bit more light treatment. I want to make sure the shadows are kind of angled in a, fairly uniform direction, so it doesn't seem, nothing seems off, right? I think part of the believable lie is that we almost want to scan things to see if anything breaks that lie. If anything breaks the overall development of what you're trying to build up. So in some ways, concept art is about build up, but then doing the what does it remind me of game, or what elements in here totally break the believability. I want to make sure that those are taken out. And one of an early on art director of my career always told me that, it's like, James, if any part of your design pulls you out of the world, pulls you out of the concept, then it doesn't belong there. And so I've kind of used that mentality ever since, and it's stuck with me. I think it's a great thing to focus on while you're doing concept art. So we always have this idea of sometimes, I want to add this and I want to add that, and it becomes like a secondary thought. Sometimes they do add to the actual idea, sometimes they don't, and we have to be pretty analytical when it comes to that. So I'm almost imagining this could be a piece of concept art for like a new war first-person shooter video game. And I think it's just a lot of fun to explore with this type of material. All right, let's put some accent lines. Now, I'm putting in lines that are accents. It may be cracks on the ground, cut lines on the floor, wires, anything that can help draw the eye into the scene, particularly towards that tank. The tank is very centralized, and this is not really a composition tutorial, more of just all right, this is how we set mood on a photo bash. But this is a technique that I use when it comes to working on feature film, working on keyframes for video games, or just environment concept art for video games. I use this a lot for working on illustrations. So it's a pretty go-to method for at least a lot of the work that I like to do. All right, in my photo reference, I found this photo of a guy with a flare, and I just thought it looked so cool. So again, kind of going back to what I was just talking about, is we get this tendency to add more things. And I'm doing it right here. You can see it happen real time. And I wanted to put in that flare, and it was a good thought, I think. But now that I added it in, I'm like, I don't think I like it. So I got rid of it. Now, just a little bit of layer cleanup. I want to make sure that I'm working my layers so that they're not getting too layer heavy. I tend to compress and collapse, some of the layers as I go, just for efficiency, because layering for environment design, at least in my opinion, is really about controlling the space, because we need space in between. All right, this is something that I really want to talk about, which is paying attention to subtle details. And subtle details often are the things that make the whole story complete. Like detectives, when they're looking at a crime scene, they're looking for small clues that put the whole story together. And that's what I like to try to do here, is these clues, and every time we're going through the piece, more and more and more, we're adding in smaller narrative elements, right? We started with the big stuff, the explosion, the tank, the cars, and the ground, and the K-rails, those separators. But now we're adding in debris, bullet holes on the taxi cabs. We're adding in cracks on the glass. We're adding debris, fire in the background. These are all smaller elements that will add the subtleties of believability, And of course, we need those to tell the good lie. We're getting close. This piece has evolved quite a bit. And for the majority of this video, we're just working on a very specific type of techniques. These are all lighting, color, and paint over techniques that I will use either on photo, or the exact same thing, I will do it on 3D. These are the same type of techniques I would use on 3D. In fact, if you guys want to see a tutorial on how I would use these techniques on a 3D base, let me know in the comments. I'm trying to think about what kind of new material to kind of put together for some next videos, and would love to hear your suggestions. So if you've got something, let me know. If you got an idea, even genre, just kind of point me in a direction, and I would love to evaluate and consider any of those ideas. I'm starting to like where this image is going, and right now, as I work on lighting and read and values, every once in a while I have to switch my hat over to looking at scale. Scale is something that's important, because if scale becomes wrong, people can see it immediately, and scale is always an important factor. Now, the sky and the vehicle had a lot of contrast, and I started to look at the bright sky instead of the vehicle in front. So my thought here was, okay, let me add more smoke, almost like this layer of rest, a layer of simple with the tank being more complex, right? So we're using this idea of contrast. Contrast is everywhere, light versus dark, warm versus cool, like round shapes versus square shapes. Contrast is everywhere. And one of the things about contrast in this particular scene is areas of noise versus areas of rest. It's another way to push subtleties, but I think it's a good topic to talk about. Yeah, I like that area of rest, like the soft smoke in the background. You got the hard, chiseled shapes of the tank. I think those are cool. Just personal flavor, personal flares. We're so reactionary. We're very reactive when we see a market put down or a certain shape. Like, we like it or we don't like it, and everything that we do is kind of based on that taste. So yes, we're at a pretty good spot so far. A little bit of color variation on the tank itself, and we're at a pretty good spot. Let's just do a quick look over to see if anything else needs adjustments. And so we're at a pretty good spot now. I feel like we've figured out layout in the initial first phase. We've done a whole ton of lighting and different elements for color. Now I just wanted to add in a little bit of a special element here. Something that is a little bit different than the art that I like to create. I guess that's more in the hardcore video game AAA shooter realm. And so I wanted to add in a little bit more of a storytelling element. And we added in this little boy. I have a 4-year-old son, and just thought of him and thought about how fearless he can be with certain things in life. Certain things that might just freak out the grown adults. And this is something that reminds me of his childhood bravery. So yes, he's taken his approach, defending the world with his wooden rifle. I actually did a talk at the Paris 2025 IAMAG conference, and did a talk about this, so definitely try to check it out. But thanks for joining me on this run through on how this image was created. Again, let's get out there and paint, make some concept art, and have some fun. Thank you for joining me on another episode of The Process. Today we reviewed this one, and I'll see you guys soon. Take care.